Hello, friends, and welcome to bonus pod.
Woo.
Bonus pod out of nowhere. It's Friday. You didn't know a podcast was coming today, but I have no idea how this is going to go. And Emily has no idea how this is going to go. But this is what we're going to do on this podcast sometimes, guys. We're going to throw spaghetti against the wall and see if it sticks. So, quick backstory on this. We were having one of our meetings earlier this week, and this idea came up, and I'm like, we got to try that. We got to try that. And there's one person that we can turn to help us out with that. And that is Emily Leiker, who is back with us here for a little fun bonus pod. And here's the experiment we are going to try today. So the question was posed to me by our fearless leader, Nate Mink. What if Syracuse football had to do a 53-man roster like an NFL team? It's been happening this week, right? NFL, and this is different this year, Emily, because NFL teams went from 90 to 53. There wasn't that in-between thing. Yeah. So let me make this abundantly clear at the beginning. This is fun. It's an experiment. We're not cutting anybody from the team, anything like that. But if Dino Babers had to produce a 53-man roster on game day like an NFL team, what would that look like?
Which is pretty similar. We pointed this out when we were kind of talking through the idea the other day to like travel rosters, because you can't bring everyone that you have rostered on your team to a road college football game. Usually it's around 65. So it is still a little bit more than a 53-man roster, but similar. Similar.
Yeah, pretty similar. So we're going to give it a shot here, right? I think it'll be interesting to see what positions of value you would take and where you have to put some priorities and putting this together. We're both smiling. Like, let's see how this turns out, because it was an interesting experiment to get ready for. So let's see how it pans out with you guys checking it out here. And we'd love to hear your feedback on it. Of course, the voicemail line is 315-552-1964. I'll put it up there on the screen if you're watching on YouTube for a little bit here. And at the bottom of your screen on YouTube, that's how you can get in touch with us to give us some feedback here on the show. We'll leave that up for a minute so you guys can check it out. All right, without further ado, Emily, let's start. Let's just go right down the line here. How many quarterbacks are you keeping?
I'm only taking 2.
Ooh, okay.
I have a little hack later, but I'm only taking 2 at quarterback.
I love that tease. I love that. I can't wait to hear what that is.
And it's Schrader and Carlos Del Rio Wilson. Okay. I mean, Syracuse's quarterback room isn't deep right now anyway. I'm leaving out Davis, who's a transfer who didn't get here until the fall, so we just haven't seen a ton out of him yet. And then Luke McPhail, who's not on scholarship, kind of already a practice squad type guy. So it just felt like if there was a position to take the least at, it felt like quarterback for me.
I went with 3. I've just seen quarterbacks go down. I got spooked watching the NFL playoffs, and the San Francisco 49ers are like, hey, you in section 10, can you play quarterback? Like, and they changed the rules in the NFL to have a third quarterback available these days. The value of the backup quarterback here, I've been pretty adamant about that. You know, since 2012, Ryan Nassib's the only quarterback that went straight through without an injury, without a coach's decision. And I think as we go through here and we go through this experiment, I don't put as much priority on a couple other positions. And I think there's room.
Okay.
There's more room than I thought. That's kind of my hint of like, whoa, that was my surprise. It's a theme that you're going to develop here. So I went with 3, Schrader, Carlos, and I like Braden Davis. I like what I saw from him in camp. He hasn't been here that long. Yeah. Right. Just needs the reps. Okay. Running backs. Emily, I only kept 3.
I only kept 3 as well. I almost only kept 2. And then when I realized that I had some room to spare, I added a 3rd one.
Just in case. We'll see how the position is used, particularly in the passing game. So, of course, LeQuint, I went with Juwan Price. And after that, like, pick a guy because they're all freshmen or unknowns. I went with Ike Daniels, but it could be anybody.
That's who I went with, too. Okay. Ike was who we saw kind of the most of, I would say, when it mattered in fall camp. And I think part of my thought process, too, was like, when you make a 53-man roster for the NFL, like you have some rookies on there. You include some guys that are going to come out. It's not just all experienced players who have been in the league. So I was like, we need some freshmen. We need some younger guys on this team for when the older guys go. So I thought Ike was a good addition here.
Okay. So we're in line there. Wide receiver. How many you got?
So I originally was like, I am not going to take more than 5. I don't need more than 5. I took 6 in the end.
Okay.
And it's kind of who you would expect. It's Alford, it's Jones, it's Trevor Pena, Mari Hatcher, Donovan Brown, who are all on the 2 deep this week. That's literally the entire 2 deep this week, I believe, for week 1. And then similar to what I said with Daniels, I wanted to throw in like a younger guy, and I went with Daryl Gill Jr., who is one of the freshmen. We heard a bit about him, saw some good receptions from him. It probably could have gone to anyone, but he's just the one I
leaned
toward.
We brought it up. The Colgate game's coming up. If things go according to plan, we're going to see a lot of these names that we're leaving out that may, if we do this again down the road, may find their way in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm with you. I went with 6. We had the same 6: Alford, Hatcher, Brown, Jones, Pena, Adams. And by the way, we know Pena's hurt.
Yeah.
So we're not taking injuries into account here. This would just be like looking at the roster. Who would you take at this point? I still would take Pena this week based on what we know, because he still could play.
Mm-hmm.
This was also, Emily, I thought I only needed 5, and then I went through it and I'm like, oh, I got room for a couple other guys here. And knowing what we think Jason Beck's going to do, like, why not throw another receiver out there? And speaking of hacks, like, I've got Gadsden wherever I want, but I can technically list him in the next position we're going to go over.
That was the thing, was like, you have Gadsden elsewhere. Adams I didn't put on because Adams is in my specialist screw. Because he's taking the lead on kick return and punt return this week with Pena out. So I was like, there's like wide receiver is a position where you can sneak other guys in there if you need them. So
for sure.
Yeah.
All right. To my favorite position, the tight end. I went with 4. Gadsden is technically a tight end, so that's where I can stuff him. I went with our guy, Max Mang, David Clement, and Dan Villari, because I looked at it, and typically you'd probably only take 2 or 3, but I had room, and B, I'm like, who's going to block?
Mm-hmm.
I need the grunt out there. I'm not sure what Clement can do in that department and how much he'll play. I'm not sure what Villari can do in that department. I know Max Mang is kind of their guy there. And he had some struggles in that department last year, but I'm not putting Gadsden out there to block. So at least I have a variety of guys that I can mix in if I want to go 2 tight ends for blocking. If I want, to throw some formations at the other team that are like, what in the world is that? Why not 4 tight ends? I got room.
So I took 3 tight ends proper. And this is where my hack comes in, because I added what I called a tool position to my roster. So for tight end proper, I put Gadsden, I put Mang. You got your receiving tight end, you got your blocking tight end. And then Clement is my 3rd tight end proper. Bigger guy. When I talked to his CBA high school coach, he said that he hadn't been involved in the receiving game in high school. He was very much a blocking tight end, but we know now from watching fall camp, they are having him catch some stuff too. So I was like, he might be a better in between than Villari is, just because he's bigger than Villari, and he's done the blocking side more, which I think is the harder side to pick up. But this is where my tool player comes in. I have Dan Villari as my tool player because he can hop in at tight end. He can hop in at wide receiver, which I believe they like switched him to originally before making him a tight end. And if all hell broke loose, he could play quarterback.
That's a great point.
So
that's a great point.
Why waste a roster spot on another quarterback when my tool player can play 3 of them?
That's a great point. That, because he can be the emergency QB.
Right.
He's just, like you said, God forbid Schrader and Del Rio Wilson go down. You have a guy that can do it. And the guy that I have 3rd, like, what's the difference between him and Dan Villari? I don't know.
I don't know.
Villari hasn't been working at as far as we know. I don't know if they're just giving him a few reps just to keep him fresh for this scenario we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. That's a great hack, though. That's a great hack.
Hack the system.
There you go, man. We know the rules, so we learn how to break them, right? Okay, to the offensive line we go. Now, I think this is where it got very interesting for both
fell apart for me.
I went 10. Excuse me. I went 10. Okay. Cruz, Blyche, Ellis, Reed, Moore, Eloa, Wollabaugh, Petrie, Bradford. Now,
so you just went the depth chart.
I just went depth chart because have we seen a rash of guys getting hurt in one game in particular? Probably not. It's been more of a collective thing. But if there's one position you just cannot mess around with on this team in particular and in the sport, it's offensive lines. I just want to feel good. I got 10 dudes. I got my whole depth chart out there. Stuff happens. This is an offensive line in transition as it is with 3 new starters, and particularly that right side of the offensive line that's getting a lot of work in there. I had to feel good about that. But how good do I feel about the depth once we get past that 6 or 7 that Dino's trying to find? I'm still wondering about that.
Yeah, I came into the experiment before I started writing things down, and I was like, I'm going to stack the O-line because you need to make sure you have people in there. And then I started doing it, and I was like, I don't know how I would get more than 10 or 11 guys out of who is on this roster that like I would 100% trust to go in a Power 5 football game. I ended up with 11. I also had all but one of the depth chart guys. I left Mark Petrie out of mine. That was kind of impulse. At first, he wasn't the only one on the depth chart I left out, but then I just went with it. Instead of Petrie, and then with my additional spot, I added Jaden Bass, who's a freshman. Again, it was the GM mindset of I need to keep a rookie, have someone that can be a big guy down the line. And then I took JUCO Lysander Moello as well, who is, people might recall, the O-lineman that Robert and I visited like 24 hours before.
Oh, wow. Well, we got to add something to his resume besides that, right?
Which he's like flown under the radar a little bit, I feel like, in fall camp, but he's a big body, and I just feel like that's a good thing to have in your depth at O-line. So those are my 2 in addition to the ones you already said.
Good list. That was probably the most eyebrow raising, what am I going to do here?
Yeah.
Type of thing on the offense. Let's flip over the defense and see where this goes. Okay. What is how many and who was on your defensive line? Let's start there.
So I ended up taking 9 defensive linemen, so essentially like a 3 deep. Okechukwu, Darden, Lockett, Jobity, Fuentes Cundiff, Jaquez, Knowlton Jr., Jaleel Smith, who's a freshman, and then Rashard Perry, who's a freshman. And I think Perry's another bit of a sneak here because we did see him running some kind of trick play offensive stuff in fall
camp. Hack. Is that another hack player right there?
I would say it's another hack. So like if they needed maybe a fullback or someone like a Rhino to go in, I think that's the guy they're looking at.
By the way, quick point. Yeah, neither one of us. We could have established a fullback. I just didn't.
Yeah.
We had Rhino 100%.
Yeah, it would have been on there. Yeah. But so this was my hack to that is like I wasn't going to name a fullback because obviously they didn't do that on their depth chart. And I don't know how often he would get used. But by keeping him in the D-line room, which I think he is a prospect in there for later, he also can potentially do that.
We have a little bit of a change here. I went with 6.
Ooh, okay.
I went with Caleb, Lockett, Jobity, Darton, Fuentes Cundiff, and Dennis Jaquez, who had, I think, one of the more interesting lines. And if you listen to our 23 and 23 podcast, which is up now, what he said about Rocky Long's defense, like, I'm not going to lie, I put a chill down my spine. I was like, okay, there's somebody saying something about this defense. So and they were saying before he came out to talk to us, Emily, like, here's a guy in camp that's been making some waves. And I just feel like in the 3-3-5, I got more people back here, and I've got a healthy enough defensive line. I feel like I only need 6.
Yeah, that's true.
As deep as the linebacker position is, as we'll get to in a second here, I could be dead wrong on this, but the more I went through this, the more I'm like, I feel like I'm good with 6 here.
I just always worry about the depth of lines, I think, on both sides of the ball. Just because like it's where
the trenches.
Football coaches talk about it. It's the trenches. That's it's right. Where everything starts.
So maybe I loaded the linebackers a little too much here. I went with 7. Marlowe, Wax, Sparrow, Derek McDonald, Thompson, who's a little banged up right now, as we know, Lowry, Bailey, and Rune.
That's my exact 7 as well.
Is that your 7? Yep. Okay, because I feel like I can pass rush with a few of those guys. I can pass cover with a few of those guys. So I've got a little more room to work with there. That's your 7 too.
Yeah, I almost went 6, but again, like Rune was my last addition. All 7 of these guys, like I would feel confident being on the field and going up against the best the ACC has to offer.
Okay, so the next category, I combined corners and safeties, right? So this is the secondary category here. I've got 10.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I went heavy here. Johnson, Wilson, Bellamy, Delane, I believe is how you say the freshman's name. Clark, Gould, Simmons, Greenwood, and Barron. Those are my 10 because I feel like I've got some strong corners there in Wilson and Johnson, but I've got some guys that can mix in a corner if I need. You got to have Barron out there. Greenwood started 8 games last year. It's kind of one of those guys you know maybe some people forgot about. Gould, everything you hear is he's going to play. He's on the depth chart. He's one of those new guys. I know that cornerback is a concern, and maybe this is just my brain is in preseason mode, but there might be more talent there than maybe we're giving this unit credit. And I just feel like there's a lot they can do there, not to mention not initially, but if I can establish a strong presence here, Emily, like you're seeing Drake May, you're seeing Jordan Travis, you're seeing some really good quarterbacks this year. I want a strong secondary.
Yeah. So I went with just 7, which is only 2 more than that's only 2 bench players, which may be risky of me. But like my thought process is like all DBs I feel like can play any secondary position. Like Justin Barron could play corner if Syracuse needed him to, or Elijah Clark could play corner, or like Isaiah Johnson could probably play a safety position. Like I just feel like what Syracuse is doing with the O-line, like in a hypothetical, they could be doing with the secondary, where it's just the top 5 to 7 guys and you rotate them around. So I had Isaiah Johnson, Justin Barron, Elijah Clark, Jason Simmons, Jeremiah Wilson, Jaden Gould, and Jaden Bellamy. So I left off Greenwood and I left off Greg Delane, who are on the depth chart, but it was just what I had to do for allowing room at other positions and for my Dan Villari hack. So.
There you go. I might have a hack coming up here when we get this special teams specialists, hashtag special teams matter. Here are my 4. I wanted 4.
Okay.
Brady Denenberg, Jack Stonehouse. Don't forget about the long snapper kids, Tom Callahan. And I put Max von Marburg on my roster. And he's kind of the last one in. I have full confidence from everything I've seen and heard that Jack Stonehouse is going to take this job and run with it. And I don't think there's going to be an issue there. But we saw what happened last year. So if I've got room on my roster, and I do, look, can Brady punt? Probably. But punting is important. Flipping the field and field position is important. So this would be like poor Max in this case. Like he's the guy like hanging on the thread that I might bump to the practice squad or something if Jack works out like I think I do. But I got to feel good about that just based on what I saw last year. And here's my hack, by the way. I didn't designate any kick returners because I've got Adams as a receiver, and he seems, and of course Pena if he's healthy. So I don't think I've got to designate those guys. Yeah.
So I also had 4 specialists. But before we get into my list, this is on topic, but off topic. Did you see that the Eagles dropped their punter yesterday and had no roster? I don't know if they still do or will still by the time this is out, but they dropped their punter. And I was like, well, who are they going to pick? Like, but also like, probably you could find someone on a regular football roster that can punt. That's not to slight punters.
No.
But like,
punters are people too, but you got to have one. We know Syracuse, like Rob Long. And
yeah, but it's the Eagles.
It is the Eagles. Like, I don't know, maybe they don't need one.
Nick Sirianni is just always having Jalen Hurts go for it.
I kind of now want to see the Eagles go into week 1 without a punter on the roster.
Oh, me too.
Just
anyway,
to see what happens. But this is punter you, baby. Riley Dixon and the crew. Nolan Cooney just got the gig with the Arizona Cardinals.
Oh, nice.
So Philly, there are punters out there. Okay, just so you know. But now that has to happen. Now we have to see
them go without a punter.
That's fantastic. Holy cow.
My 4 specialists were Denenberg, Stonehouse, Callahan. You needed those 3. And then this is where I put DeMarcus Adams, though he could also play wide receiver. Yeah, I basically just approached this like, who do you absolutely need because no one else would be able to do it? Because like Justin Barron's the holder. He's already on my roster because he's in the secondary. Like, I didn't need to also list another holder and waste a roster spot. So,
and you don't have to designate a lot of the gunners and people that are out there. But why did LaQuinn Allen get number 1 according to Dino Babers? He switched numbers this year because of his work on special teams. Like special teams is the way to a coach's heart.
Special teams matters, you guys.
110%. my love between special teams and the tight end. It is pretty
competing interests.
That is our 53-man roster. What do you think? I think the spaghetti stuck to the wall. That was kind of fun.
It worked. It was fun.
It worked.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe we'll revisit it. Obviously, injuries are going to happen and got to make some adjustments. And, why not? Bonus pod coming out of nowhere. We'll see what happens down the road. But, hey, it's football season. Let's put in a plug. Emily, Chris Carlson, and I, we're going to be all over it on game days. Speaking of bonus podcasts, we are going to be doing a post-game show.
Live in studio. Not live.
Not live. Maybe
in studio.
Maybe we'll throw you off kilter one night and do it live. But Emily and I, after every Syracuse game, there might be a game or two Emily can't join me if she's on the road and things are crazy. But we are going to do a post-game podcast. It'll be sitting there waiting for you Sunday morning, maybe even a little earlier if the game's earlier in the day. Like, we'll just crank it out there when it's ready. But get ready for a Syracuse football post-game show. We're going to do that throughout the season. Of course, our coverage on syracuse.com. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on the 53-man roster. 315-552-1964 is the voicemail, or you know how to get in touch with Emily and I otherwise. Thanks for listening and hanging out with us here on the special bonus pod, the Syracuse football 53-man roster. You guys have a great weekend and happy football.